and hugely important task today. And three people to talk about it who are all experts in their field. They're here to talk about their specific projects and what we might learn from them. These are projects that the Paris Peace Forum organisers judge are the most significant of all they have been considering. Our guests are Andrew Heslop from the World Association of News Publishers, Kanbar Hossein Bor of the Global Media Freedom Coordinator at the UK Foreign Office, and Leon Wilhelms from Free Press Unlimited. We have just 45 minutes for our session, and we will first hear a very brief overview from each of our panellists about their work and their perspective. We'll then have a discussion, and that will include taking questions from all of you. So please start submitting them now, and we'll come to them later on in the session. So, today's session. The overall theme of the Paris Peace Forum this year is about finding specific solutions to urgent and apparently intractable problems, often made worse by the pandemic. Independent media, as I'm sure everybody on this call is aware, is essential in holding power to account and giving users a perspective on their world. It's also essential for democracy. How can elections be free and fair if voters don't know what's true and what of a candidate's claims to believe? But the lights are going out on free and fair media all over the world. The economic model that pays for the expensive work of rigorous journalism has been eroded by the move of audiences to digital. The problem of disinformation, deliberately spread untruths, has exploded, and it has become highly dangerous and difficult to be a journalist in many countries. But the pandemic has also highlighted how vital good and accurate journalism is. This is a public good we don't want to lose. We're here to look at ways forward to enhance a healthy media ecosystem. Last year, I presented to the Paris Peace Forum one such solution. The Trusted News Initiative is the world's only fast alert system for the most dangerous disinformation, and its members include the tech companies such as Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Microsoft, and the world's major news organisations, including the BBC, where I worked for many years. So we are looking forward and what we can do. First, we will hear from Andrew Heslop, Executive Director, Press Freedom at the World Association of News Publishers, which has led a project on strengthening African media. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll keep my opening remarks very brief. I think you've underlined, Jessica, some of the critical issues that we're dealing with globally in the media industry. COVID, if there's anything positive to be drawn from the last 18 months, I think has really underlined the importance of a quality professional, independent free media in terms of the immense sacrifices that media professionals have been making over the last 18 months to bring essential information to the public domain, communicating essential information around the pandemic and the response of the authorities in charge of dealing with it. And I think that's something that really needs to be, sort of held up as a part of the frontline response to all of this. Media have put themselves in a very difficult situation to continue bringing us the news. And again, the essential role of holding power to account, to really look at those decisions that are made on behalf of all of us, really. And I think that's perhaps something to also mention as well, that the role, this is nothing new. Professional journalists have been doing this for as long as there have been professional journalists. Sometimes it's emphasized and other times it sort of goes by the wayside. But I think perhaps the universality of this situation that we all find ourselves in, it is a global pandemic, has really amplified the role of professional journalists and brought that to the fore. Sadly, the negative side, of course, as you alluded to as well, is the continued financial decline of markets everywhere in the world. COVID, for every sector of the economy, the global economy has had devastating effects, and arguably for media, it has been really catastrophic. A situation that was in existence well before any of this, of course, and I'm sure we'll get into sort of more details and more of the sort of reasons why during the course of this session. But the accelerated decline of independent media and the business model that supports investigative journalism, journalism that holds power to account and that works in the public interest is really now an urgent situation. We're talking about an existential threat to the survival of independent free media, and it really has an urgency that, if it didn't before, is certainly being underlined by this pandemic. And we're talking about solutions. This is why we're here. This is why we're talking about these things. And look, if I had the answer to that question, then I'd be perhaps sitting on a desert island somewhere. But at the same time, I think one thing to highlight, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, is the media ecosystem exists within the wider information ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there are so many stakeholders, so many players, so many interests that have genuine concerns about the survival of free and independent media. And I think perhaps one way to sort of begin the conversation amongst governments, amongst donors, amongst the general public, is to really approach this frankly, honestly, and say, we all have a role to play. What is our role and how do we address this? Because it is an urgent situation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Next, Leon Wilhelms. Leon is Director of Policy and Programmes at Free Press Unlimited, and it has spearheaded Together for Reliable Information, also in sub-Saharan Africa. Leon.
Yeah, thank you very much. At Free Press Unlimited, we've been mostly engaged in working on projects that basically have three pillars. But I should say first that one of the important things that we believe in is that niche media, quality journalism often doesn't happen enough in the mainstream media, and therefore it's very important to look at small media houses and how they economically survive, and that has been our real focus. So we're working to address the challenges of COVID, as Andrew has really said, the economic survival plus the trust crisis, basically by thinking about the motto of universal access to information, which is saving lives, building trust, bringing hope. And I think that our projects have been designated around trying to address the crisis that the pandemic caused and has aggravated existing trends in economic survival of media, basically by reaching out to them jointly in order to create a collaborative effort. And I think the three problems that exist, building trust, which is largely due to the unwanted disinformation that is spiraled by the social media and tech platforms. Journalism is needed to do that. Independent journalism, fact-based journalism, ethical journalism. And those are unfortunately the media partners that suffer. The second very important part that we see aggravated during the pandemic is the lack of inclusion. Half the world's population are women, and they're often neglected in the media ecosystem. And in order to have a healthy eco-media system, we need more inclusion. So we've been focusing a lot on finding gender-based solutions under the hypothesis that if you are more inclusive, you find new audiences, and that will create more trust, more sustainability, more audience, more money. This is a hypothesis we're currently testing in a project that is funded by the UK FCDO, the next speaker.
Yeah.
But let me say that from a perspective of what is needed in order to address the challenges, there's no lack of experimentation, engagement, new ideas, and experimentation to address the economic crisis by the media houses, but we need policy actors, governments, corporations also to do more. We need the tech platforms to be taxed so that this money can be plugged into quality journalism. We need corporations to invest in quality journalism, not to disinvest. Some of the problems in, for example, Central Europe are caused also by the withdrawal of investments by bigger publishers from those media landscapes. I should say we also need donors to really address, and we really have to thank the European Union, which has been made available an enormous grant for us to work on the economic survival of media houses in sub-Saharan Africa. They were very quick on their feet. So we're working along three pillars, basically immediate response grants, shared resources so people can learn from each other, working together, and policy and advocacy to protect journalists from harm. I think those are the three elements that are overridingly important if we look at media viability. So I hope that helps.
Very much. Thank you, Leon. Finally, Kanbar Hussain Bohr, who is the UK government's Global Media Freedom Coordinator, who can also tell us about the Primed programme supporting public interest media. So, Kanbar.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica. It's great to be joining this great panel on this really important issue. I'll make a couple of quick observations, but I want to build on the point you started off with, that we are on a point of crisis, and we have seen at first hand how the pandemic has also exacerbated this. Taking a step back, I think there has been a traditional view and a right view that journalism was under attack physically, if I can put it that way. And the evidence bears that out. In the last 30 years or so, as I understand it, journalists after armed forces are the most targeted and killed professionals in the world when it comes to serving overseas. That's quite a devastating statistic. But on top of that, journalism is now also suffering a point of existential crisis insofar as ad revenue is concerned and the viability of media. And we know that in the last 10 years has been set out, ad revenue has halved as news migrates online. And in my role, I've seen it firsthand, lots of journalists and news outlets talking about the struggles of trying to keep a business alive. And indeed, the point Leon makes about inclusion is important there, because some of the most marginalized voices in this context are often the ones first to go. So far as what we can do about it, three quick observations from my perspective as a policymaker and as represented in the UK who believes media freedom is vital to democracy. First, we can't do enough. We must do more. And so far as what we have been doing, we, the UK, I'm proud to say, 2 years ago came forward with our partners, Canada, to create the Media Freedom Coalition, which we believed was essential to help change the narrative globally around how states view media, and also underscore the public interest that media plays. And in regard to that, I'm proud to say that the coalition has now reached, next month will reach 50 states. It's issued 18 statements on situations ranging from Mexico to China to Russia, and it's giving a voice, we hope, to journalists and advocates everywhere that states care, and this is really important. But the next phase of that is we are really looking at how we can make greater use of the Media Freedom Coalition diplomatic network to do the essential public/private lobbying to make a difference to those journalists on the ground. And the UK G7 presidency has tried to really elevate the importance of this as well. Finally, just a thought on the issue of media sustainability. This is something that has been raised for the first time under the G7 presidency this year. And there's a commitment in states to cooperate with each other through the coalition to improve the sustainability of media. And we are looking at how we can do that, including through updating sectoral development guidance on that. Second quick point is we need to build on some of the examples of success. And you mentioned it earlier, but I would like to highlight the Prime programme, Protecting Independent Media for Effective Development, which the UK has supported. It's been working in Bangladesh, Ethiopia and Sierra Leone. It's been an unprecedented collaboration that has combined the skill set of BBC Media Action Group, Free Press Unlimited, and the Media Investment Development Fund, to name a few. It has a flagship component, which is focusing on knowledge and sharing that across the world and generating evidence to demonstrate what works and what doesn't work, and how access to media can have a pivotal role in terms of enabling individuals to participate in life more generally. My final thought on all of this is taking a step back. We can't view media in isolation. And as you mentioned, the theme this year's conference is to look at these intractable problems. And I'm sure that a common theme amongst all these discussions is that we have to view this holistically as part of a broader context. Namely, we have seen authoritarianism on the rise. We have seen democracies further under attack. So we do need to ask ourselves, what role can media freedom play and media development play insofar as that broader struggle that we have in terms of trying to promote democracy, underscore its importance and its value, but also look at democracy through what many see described as a network of liberty, how democracies and using their comparative advantage on trade, security, investment, how all of that can actually be an enabler for media freedom and development. I think that's the next real challenge for all of us, to view these issues holistically. So thank you very much for having me here, and I'm looking forward to engaging with yourself, the panel, and anyone who's got questions.
Thank you very much. We've got a huge amount to discuss here. We've got about 25 minutes to discuss it in, and we want all of your questions. So please submit them, bring them in, and we'll take them into the discussion. We're going to look at some of these particular issues, then some of the solutions, and then finally what we might be asking of particular individuals and organisations that are linked to the Paris Peace Forum. So first of all, some pretty big issues holding us back. We've talked about the financial model. That is a huge issue in its own right, but I guess can we dive into other things that can be done without some holistic issue, some holistic solution to that financial model? Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Thanks for that, Jessica. Yeah. The elephant in the room is the massive amount of revenues being directed away from media over the last 10, 15 years by the emergence of the big tech platforms. And I think without addressing that particular issue and how it's resolved and how media relate with those tech companies, it's a tricky one for us. The World Association of News Publishers has members around the world who have varying degrees of relationships with these platforms, with these companies, some very good and some very, well, not so good, and in various different stages of working out solutions, either directly or bilaterally or sort of in collaboration, and in some markets not talking at all. And I think that's, if there were to be one to pick out from, and I agree entirely with Kamba's, sort of suggestion that this is a holistic issue. It's almost impossible to treat one element without looking at the whole, because media is so intertwined with, as I mentioned, sort of to begin with, this information ecosystem and all the different stakeholders within that it's impossible to isolate one element. But if we're looking at sort of an immediate issue that really needs to be looked at with a frankness and an honesty that will do something to move the dial towards a more sustainable future for free, independent media, then the financial issues related to the ad revenue that's coming off the online platforms and the way that's dispersed and distributed is really number one on everyone's agenda, wherever we are in the world, whichever markets we're looking at.
Really interesting. Leon, can I turn to you? Trust lies at the heart of the relationship between news organisations and their audiences, and trust in all institutions, as we know, has been severely dented in recent years. Again, what can be done? What would you like to point to as a practical takeaway for this audience?
Well, I think that one of the learnings that we see is that, first of all, the media markets are not functioning. They're distorted by the emergence of the digital transition. There are opportunities there, but we see that disadvantageously small and journalist-specific accountability groups, media outlets, etc., have a problem accessing knowledge. So one of the things that we think is tremendously important and underestimated still by many donors is that we need cross-sectoral, cross-border learning. So one of the things that we're doing, for example, in the COVID Response in Africa program, which we call Together for Reliable Information, we build a shared resource where people can exchange stories for example, there's a lot of viral stories about disinformation, viral stories that need to be addressed, and people can share strategies on how to address and reach out to audiences. I think also one of the most important things that we're doing in that project is this shared resource, which can lead to finding new answers to disinformation. But also it increases the ability of access to fact-based information. And access to fact-based information has actually been very problematic during the COVID crisis, because governments in many countries have been reluctant to share information, sometimes for the right reasons, don't want to create panic, etc. Sometimes for wrong reasons, because there have been bad habits growing into, for example, the tendering process for purchasing mouth masks, etc. So the way in which we think, and that is what we actually, so I mean, I can't stress this enough. In the COVID response group, we also reached out to all our competitors on the development media market, IMS, Deutsche Welle, Fondation Hirondelle, RSF, Article 19, to work together. Everybody had, new partners in different countries. So we combined these efforts. So I think initially, the journalist market is very competitive. But if we want to address this crisis, we need to work together to find joint solution. And then I think reaching audiences has become increasingly a problem for many, let's say, traditional media outlets who are working with radio, television. There's still a lot of them. And they need to understand better how to make use of the digital options that are there, especially in finding audiences that are underserved, which I made earlier this point. There's a tremendous gender gap in the media menu. And that is one of the things that we're addressing within the Prime Consortium in Bangladesh. It's one of these countries where men are really dominant in the media practice, both in terms of leadership, in terms of being addressed, and being... So women, who are mostly bearing the brunt of this COVID crisis in terms of economic shortages, health issues, etc., are underaddressed. And we need to find new strategies to engage with them. I think it's super important. It's really underestimated. The gender gap is tremendous. The gender monitoring, media monitoring program found out that if we act at the current speed of increasing women audiences, which stands at 4% in the last 5 years, it will take us to the end of the century before we have gender equality in the media. That's just criminal. It's unacceptable. And it is counterproductive for development. This is actually the main point.
That's fantastic. We will come in, we'll dive into some of those points. I want to turn to Kanbar. Looking at starting to build solutions, what place is or should media freedom have in the international aid conversation? How might it sit when we think about international development? And I also want to reflect a couple of questions here. One from Rashwiat Mukundu, who said Primed model is amazing as it looks holistically at media development from policy to platforms and the role of local actors. Cross-sharing of information enables learning and broader influence. So I wonder, Kanbar, if you can talk about that wider issue and indeed anything about Primed that you want to add that's relevant.
Thank you. On your first point, what I'm struck by is that traditionally speaking, in the development sector, media development or media freedom has been seen a bit of a niche issue. I forget the exact statistic, but some people say somewhere between 0.1 and 1% of development assistance was spent on issues such as media development or media freedom. So we're starting from that perspective. I'm pleased to say that's changing, albeit slowly. There is a gradual acknowledgement, and Leon mentioned this point earlier, that enabling media freedom, enabling media development in itself supports the wider development objectives. And it makes sense to all of us, but just to take a step back, if you're able to help individual citizens to be better informed in all contexts, be it through health, politics, or whatever. Hopefully that will lead to better decision making, more accountability. All of that makes sense, but statistically, unfortunately, these issues are a bit in the margin. That's changing slowly. Unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that the pandemic has had huge impacts, not least on physical finances. So as a result of that, I don't see us being in the context next year or two to look at these issues where what we may have done in the past, namely through throwing more money at it. We're going to have to be more innovative and think about how do people go about deciding what are their priorities in the development sector from the outset. And from that perspective, how can we influence those decision makers at that early stages in terms of inception, program design, to take these issues into account? I think we're going to have to look at it much more structurally. On the issue of BBC Primed, it's great to hear positive feedback on that. As I've described to you before, we are very proud of the support of it. I would probably have to defer to Leon, whose organisation has worked within the Prime context to speak much more authoritatively about its impact. But I can certainly tell you, as a decision maker here in the FCDO, we are proud of the impact that it's having and the ability to bring in different actors in this often competitive space to actually help focus on how we can share evidence and information for the benefit of the communities concerned.
Can I just pick up that point? What does practical collaboration between media organisations and in this space look like? Leon and then Andrew on that.
Well, practical media cooperation is basically, the media sector, as I mentioned before, is not lacking zeal in order to address these issues. There's a lot of experimentation. Sharing these lessons is one of the bigger objectives that we have, both within the Primed project, but also in the EU INPA-funded Sub-Saharan Africa response to COVID. I think that we have to understand that in many countries, media outlets that provide essential services to people in terms of public interest, information on health, but also on wider issues of equality, etc., are really understaffed and under-resourced. So the issue here is, can models that have been proven of good quality, for example, crowdfunding, can that help media houses that are ailing in Bangladesh? So one of the things that we are engaged in with UNESCO at the moment is trying to mainstream these lessons in kind of media viability, shared lessons learned. So where we combine actors from different countries to learn from each other, to critique each other, in order to improve on their own audience engagement strategies, to improve on their inclusiveness. And so this is being why we think we have a role here to play as a mediator between all these different constituencies. All these media outlets are working day to day super hard, and they don't really have time for all these strategic thinking around media viability in the long run. We need to assist with it. And in the gender inclusion issues in Bangladesh, one of the things we see is that issues that are of vital interest to women are neglected in the media scene. One of the things we're doing is helping local actors to monitor their own gender sensitivity, their own gender leadership, to monitor that in a way that is productive and helps newsrooms to see how disadvantageously they're treating women in their content production. And this has a kind of a shame aspect to it, whereby media houses who actually do monitor this improve their quality very dramatically. Now, one of the interesting things here, and this is what I want to point out, is that the way in which we monitor gender-sensitive content has been developed by a tech upstart in Mali. So there is so much room for improvement on cross-continental learning even, we found out that people from Central America can learn a lot from media houses in Russia because they're facing the same repressive government strategy to keep them away from the public. And so there's so much room to improve in facilitating that shared learning. And I believe that, One IFRA, UNESCO, us, and others should be really focusing more on that. We could make great progress. But of course, we need the policy aspect and the money aspect that Kanbar was talking about. The OECD simply needs to prioritize in its development strategies media engagement much higher, and especially public interest media. Because don't get me wrong, the problem is also, and I think this is a point that we're missing, the bad actors in the media also exist. Those that spiral distrust, that and they are doing well. Actually, the business model of the tech platforms helps them better than the quality public interest media. So there's policy issues there that need to be addressed. The media can't do it alone. That is why we need some kind of policy thinking around how we can change the existing media market model and the ecosystem.
Thank you. Very briefly, Andrew, should collaboration include the tech platforms?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. They have to be part of the conversation. It's part of our sort of DNA as an organization, and particularly in the program, the project that we're here at the forum to sort of highlight, the Strengthening Media in Africa program, touches on many of the areas that Leon's mentioned in the work that FPU are doing. And we find that ultimately collaboration between media professionals is the absolute way to go. It guides our strategy, it guides our existence as an organization, whether it's the wider organization or whether it's our media freedom, media development work. And the program that's generously supported by the Danish Foreign Ministry has allowed us to bring together actors from countries that otherwise wouldn't perhaps be in contact or be in professional relationships with. And as Leon touched on as well, the challenges are broadly similar. The ways of addressing these challenges differ from market to market, of course, given the context and the environment that media are operating in. But one of the very positive elements of our particular program and the work that we've been engaged in for many years, and I'm sure Leon will attest to this with the work that FPU do, is when you see those moments of collaboration, when you see sort of the ability to put together people in a room or virtually as we are living in this current period to discuss those challenges, the realization that people aren't on their own in terms of facing these challenges, that there are collective solutions to be found through the experiences, through the successes, but quite often also the failures of media companies in trying to address either structural issues regarding their business model, their newsroom platforms, the issue of diversity and improving not only the content and the gender diversity within the media content and the output, but within media themselves. The makeup of newsrooms and especially boardrooms is incredibly important to then being able to mainstream the idea of gender diversity in content and bringing up some sort of equilibrium in that. So, yeah, back to your original question, Jessica, the tech platforms have obviously the resources, have the reach, have the data, which is a whole separate issue and a whole separate debate, to really assist in every aspect of this conversation and all of the challenges that media are facing wherever they are in the world.
Fantastic. We're going to turn to questions. Please keep them coming in. Kanbar, you talked about the danger of journalists, two journalists. They're being killed and they're also being harassed online, particularly women. There's a question from Tijana Bajeljak, and she says, is there a way out from the situation where nation ethnicity is radicalized to such an extent to become greater treat to journalists? I think that's greater threat to journalists than the government. In other words, the government often in many places that we're talking about presents a threat to journalism, but so too do individuals. Do you have a thought about that, Kanbar?
Well, I want to acknowledge the fact that journalists, unfortunately, are facing threats all the time, and these threats are increasing. So I think the thrust of the question, I agree with completely. And you just got to look at the statistics, really. I mentioned to you earlier that the International Federation of Journalists has pointed out that journalists have been, as a profession, have been the second most targeted or killed in terms of our conflict over the last 30 years. I know Nesta have recently done a work on this to look at the threats faced by female journalists, and they are particularly susceptible, especially online, because of this misogynistic sort of experiences and contexts which they are exposed to. So I want to acknowledge that. In terms of what we can do, I can only speak on behalf of the UK in this context and share our lessons there. And we certainly experience these challenges as well. But in response to them, we have developed a UK National Action Plan. Our Department for Culture and Media has taken the lead on that. And this year was the first year of it. And having sat on those meetings, I'm struck by the fact that when you bring together people from journalists to government officials, to also the police as well, to reflect on these challenges, and you can come up with some practical solutions. So, for example, the police in the UK have now got a dedicated point of contact as part of the National Action Plan to ensure that when journalists face threats, they can speak to someone who actually knows more about the context of journalism, who can then make a much more informed decision about how to respond to those threats. So those are my reflections there, but unfortunately, your question does raise a very good point about the overall threat.
Fantastic, thank you. Another one we've now got, and I'm going to direct to Andrew, from Nina Yordanova. What is the best way to get buy-in and secure investment from corporations for good quality journalism? What arguments strike a chord with them? Andrew.
Again, a $1 trillion question. It's a hard sell. Look, the very sort of existence of media is to question and probe and criticize, expose, and deal in the light and the transparency of issues, which isn't always what corporations want, sadly, in this day and age. And yeah, I think as we've touched on briefly in the conversation as well, this issue of trust. Trust is becoming its own sort of element within the economy, the digital economy, and the real world economy in many respects, as it has been for forever. But I think even more so now, given the debates that are surrounding issues of trust in media, or trust in corporations or products or solutions to health crises or whatever it may be. And I think it has to be a sell along the lines of, it's in your interest. It is in your interest to be exposed when you do things wrong, and it is in your interest to be, exposed or highlighted when you succeed, when you are sort of putting things back into the community, back into society that have effect and impact the public good in a way, positively or negatively, that requires expose within the professional quality media environment. Along with all of that, and this is a huge can of worms, but you have the ethical policies, the professionalism of media that are guiding how those criticisms or those sort of spotlights are made, but at the same time, understanding that media is a professional business that has standards that it adheres to and that need to be applied across whatever story they're covering, whether it's a commercial story, a corporate story, a sports story, or a health crisis story. Understanding that corporations themselves have a lot to give, but should also expect the microscope of criticism and expose when it's required. I think good luck convincing them all that is in their best interest, but I would propose that as being one solution.
Very briefly, we'll take a final question. How and this one I think is for Leon. How can media reconcile the need to win readers' loyalty and to build media literacy, i.e. strengthen readers' ability to consume media beyond their specific outlet? And that's from Pierre-Olivier Bigot.
Well, I think that one of the things we have to look at is the amazing run that we saw across the globe when the pandemic started. People ran for quality media. They ran for public interest media. So we have to trust the audience that they know where to find truth. And we need a safer world for the truth, as Kanbar was pointing out. We need to learn how to do a better job at serving public interest. I think this is sometimes neglected in some of the niche media houses. People take it for granted that everybody understands why they are there. And I think that modern journalism is also thinking about how to engage strategically with audience needs. We see a lot of hoo-ha regarding the COVID crisis, with experts tumbling over each other with, in talk shows. And sometimes the public cannot make sense out of it. And starting with what the public needs, I think, is a way to embrace both the service and the trust issue, and will lead to economic improvement of the media houses.
Fantastic. In one sentence, because we're just coming to the point where we have to wind up, in one sentence from each of you, what are you asking from decision makers at the Paris Peace Forum? Starting with you, Andrew. One sentence.
Look, I think, how long is the sentence? I think, look, the general acceptance that media, to have a healthy, a diverse, a representative, quality media ecosystem, if that's the overall ideal, if that's what we're looking for, if that's the gold standard that we want to see across our societies around the world, then we need to take a very honest, rigorous examination of all the different aspects that go into making up that media ecosystem, and really deal with those individual issues together.
Campbell.
From my perspective, media is intrinsic to our wider objectives, be it trade, security, investment, peace, cooperation. And if that's the case, which I believe it is, we need to do more to both promote media, but also keep it sustainable.
Fantastic. And Leon.
We need a new deal for journalism. We know how to do it. Help us do it.
Fantastic. Thank you for a brilliantly stimulating discussion. We are going to wind it up there because we're out of time, unfortunately. We could go on talking about this for many more minutes and hours. A flourishing free media worldwide, as we've heard, is an essential bedrock for a lot of other things that matter. You've heard some practical ways that we can strengthen it and quite literally mind the backs of journalists everywhere. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for watching. This could not be a more pivotal and important time. And I hope that this discussion has left you energised and also indeed maybe even a little bit hopeful. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.